Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Deck Discussions. And today I have the honor of bringing to you Reverend David Miller from First United Methodist Church, Winter Park, and another one of my fine and beloved covenant brothers. So, welcome, David.
Thank you, Roy. It's good to be with you, man.
Yeah. So, you've got a gist of this format because we've been working through the covenant brother. The first question I ask everybody is, how do we meet?
Yeah. I've been fun. I've been watching the other brothers, and of course, we are like all different. So it's kind of cool to see the way that opposites kind of work together. That's been one of the joys of the whole group. So I appreciate that. I was thinking about that, Roy, and of course, like others, have known of you for a lot longer than I've known you, and the reputation that you have in the conference. And my early exposure to that reputation was around your commitment to orthodoxy and how you worked that through. And I really was attracted to that and wanted to know more about that and how you held that in tension with your strength in terms of justice and how you pulled those together. So that's kind of why I first heard about you. I think the place we first really started to get to know each other was on one of those crazy running trips we had. I think it was about 5 years ago. Maybe no, it's about 10 years ago now, or I don't know, somewhere in there, 7 years.
Can I interrupt you just for a second and say that Dave Miller is the insanity behind taking us on these Ragnar trips?
Oh yeah, I get credit for that. Yeah. So we were doing the DC one. I wasn't in the group yet. I think that was like what sealed the deal for Brett and I to be able to join you. Is like we did this. I said, let's do this crazy trip because I knew Steve from going to school with his wife. And so you were the extraordinary driver of us who held you, the glue that held the crazies together. And so I had a chance to learn more about you and hang out with you under fun but also stressful conversations. I think you helped me make it back to the van one night when I didn't think I was actually going to make it. And that was really
I think that was a Civil War bridge, wasn't it?
It was, and Tatum was running the battlefield at middle of the night.
You look like a wounded soldier coming in from the field.
I don't remember. I remember you being there at my exchange, and I remember the next thing I was in the van, but I think you carried me. I'm not sure, Roy. It was great.
And you were dragging, I think, your left leg behind you. It was kind of a...
And then I think, for me, the trips are really the amazing part of it. We're so far apart, and I do appreciate the time to spend together, but the trips for me really give us a chance to know more. And so I think the place that I really felt connected with you was on our trip to Kenya. When we went to Kenya, and of course I slept on your shoulder all the way back, and 37 hours back from Kenya.
David Miller drool on my left shoulder.
That was whooped. Yeah. So yeah, both times. You're great to have around when you're whooped.
And it's funny because in all of these conversations, when people bring up all of our worldly travels, which our group has traveled a lot together.
Oh yeah.
And you and Scott and I to Africa twice now.
Yeah.
So those,
and we did Reynolds too, up to North Carolina.
Right. But we always say that we can't share any more information about those trips.
No, don't worry. No secrets. No secrets divulged. No. That was so. I think it was the trips that I really came to beyond your reputation for your faith and your intellect. And your passion for those that are left out. Got to see what an enjoyable guy you are, and just how authentic you are and who you are. And so I've appreciated that.
Well, thank you. It's been great to be on the journey with you, and thank you for inviting me to some of these places. I mean, I would have never
next. Yeah,
I would have never gone to Africa if it wasn't for
You'll never go back.
I gotta say, there are times in my life where you remember the moments you've laughed the hardest.
Yeah.
And in that top 10, you're in a couple of those.
Unfortunately, I'm the cause of a couple of them, but
but we won't tell those stories either, David.
Yeah, Scott's not here, but I will forever, ever and ever, all of my life, remember having that dinner up in the lodge after that day and just rolling around so hard they wanted to kick us out. Just laughing and laughing and laughing. It's great.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So, and I ask this to everybody, and I think it's just a question people are always interested in, call stories. And I preface it by saying I'm not I'm not interested in the kind of the, we all get God calls us first and foremost. Let's just get that out of line. God is the one who calls.
Okay.
You knew that, right? I mean,
Okay.
thank you for receiving that with humor, Dave, because some of them received it totally in like, are you serious?
Well,
but
Jesus.
I'm interested in a little bit more of the detail behind it. Like,
I
mean, some people it's a burning bush, some people it's not. And so,
yeah.
Tell your
I was
story.
at the Tampa Bay Lightning game, and Jesus came and spoke to me.
That's right. Lightning bolt came down from heaven.
Yeah. No. So my story. So I'm a second generation Christian. My mother became a Christian when she was in high school, like 18, I guess, just graduated. Her dad, my grandfather, was killed when she was 10 in a logging accident. And the last thing he said before he went out that morning to go logging was, I want to go to church. And they had never been. And the next couple of years were really tough for my mom and my grandmother and my aunt. But eventually they landed in LA and they went to church, and they became Christians when mom was 18. And she went from there onto the mission field. She became a missionary from Missionary Alliance Missionary. She went to Cambodia. This was right before the war in Vietnam. And she met my father. He was in the Army there as a military advisor. And they left Cambodia like 2 days before the country fell, and came back, and they had this incredibly beautiful and handsome, intelligent son, and just amazing. But all that is to say, I grew up in a house that was faithful and very religious. Faithful because their relationship with God was authentic. Clearly knew that in the way that they lived their lives, that kind of this walk with God was real for them. But also were very religious. We were always at church, and it was a part of our life, and was expected to be part of our life. And certainly the highest good you could do for God was ministry. That's kind of the background out of my. So I, in college, like McRae, actually was a biology major. And at that time was thinking about going to the mission field to do forestry and stuff like that, reforestation. And kind of grew disillusioned with that in college. And in that process, one day, got a phone call in Chicago at Wheaton College, and from a Methodist minister in Homestead, who said, got your name from so-and-so, would you think about coming and being our youth director? And I went, well, okay. I mean, he'd never met me. I'd never met him. I'd never been in a Methodist church. I mean, it was kind of odd. It was just like out of the blue, like you do that ever today. So I started going down in the summers, and then came back after school and did doing youth ministry in Homestead, Silver Palm United Methodist Church. And started to go, hey, you know what? There's something really kind of amazing about this. I have some background, some history in my own way I was shaped and formed in terms of my values and my experiences, and I have some gifts this way. Maybe could it be? And I started talking to people, and people started saying, well, I see this in you, or I don't see this in you. And in a long time, the thing that held me back was this idea of preaching. That just scared the snarkies out of me. But enough people said, I think so. And so I kind of just said, I'm going to walk door by door and see what happens. And that's kind of how I got started. It was some other people pointing. Of course, ordination is simply this idea that we have public confirmation of a certain role in the church. And contrary to what my family of origin said, everybody has that calling, and they're all of the highest good, whether it's banker, doctor, nurse, mom and home, whatever that calling is that fits in between our gift set and what brings us joy. And so that's kind of how I got started in this process.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm thinking it because a lot of it does have to do with your influences. So you have these family influences. You have this kind of mysterious call in the night from a guy wanting you to be the youth.
That was a little wacky, yeah.
So that might have raised some hairs on your neck, wondering why.
Yeah, especially since I kind of felt like, there was this tug and about doing some type of service, you know, that was a value. Contribution was a value growing up, which it is for so many, right? So I definitely have wrestled with the call. I've been on it now almost 30 years, and there are some years I'm not so sure, you know, and or that I want it, or some years I'm not so sure I want it, you know, but certainly haven't felt released from it, and it certainly continues to be a match with what has God done in my life with what I find fulfillment in, and that's kind of where I land, and that could have been a number of things based upon the way God knitted me together, I guess.
Yeah, but I think, Dave, your strength in ministry and being able to bring large groups of people together and have the patience and the endurance. I know I chuckle at that because I know that's part of the struggle. The multidimensional nature of being in the ordained ministry is mind-blowing, and most people can't even comprehend it. But you have a gift to navigate that in a way that some folks just don't, which is why you're there, you know. So, and I appreciate
that. Yeah. I certainly draw. I mean, one of the things that's helped me tremendously has been learning from my covenant brothers. You know, so I have a set of strengths and gifts that fit a certain niche. I am very passionate about large groups. I mean, I'm the guy that cries at commercials of people coming together to do these things. You know, I'm you know, forget it. I'm a what. So that's a passion of mine. But you know, in terms of preaching, in terms of theology from you, Roy, you know, in terms of Williamson and his work with the community. I mean, I'm learning so much, and I think it's been one of the beauties of having this community for me is I definitely am stronger in my calling because I've been able to hang out with you guys and learn from you, you know, and so I'm very thankful for that. I'd be very one-dimensional, I think, if I didn't have this group of brothers around me.
Yeah, I agree totally. I can't imagine doing it life alone in this. The idea of community, the importance of the community, and the value of celebrating the diversity and difference. I mean, when you mentioned at the beginning that all of us are different, a lot of times people think of our covenant group and y'all get along really well. But part of that is we are able to identify how unique we all are in that. I mean, you and I really, personality types are on the other opposite extreme.
We are, yeah. But I think it's a respect and a value. So, you know, when we were in Africa this last time, we went back to that. We did that half-day trip through the preserve. No hippos this time, which is good. But Scott stayed close, which is another good thing. We took a couple minutes and we were just standing there. And I remember just standing there with you and Scott and just in the midst of the group, you know, just having this moment and saying, you know, I really respect and value these guys. And I think that's the glue that holds it, as I have a deep respect for everybody in the group and what they do. And so I can really value that we're different, that I know they bring something that I need to listen to. I don't agree with everything, for sure. I don't agree with everybody in the group. And I couldn't do what some of them do or even live with doing some of them do, but I have a deep respect for it. And that's really cool.
So this is the Christian question, you know, all good Christians can.
Oh, you're gonna bring God back in now. Is that right? You know, just
bring God back to the story.
God, come on back.
Enough sentimentalism on this covenant group stuff. So if you were to share a favorite passage, story, book of the Bible, what would that be? Yeah,
so I tend to really gravitate towards scripture that is really layered and that has a lot of handles. And so my favorite Old Testament book is the book of Jonah. I actually love the book of Jonah. I could preach on that Jonah every year, and I could read every commentary on this just because it's so well written. It's just, there's just so much that you can just get my head into, and the surprise, it's full of surprises, the surprise of the pagans who are really Christian and the Christian that really isn't Christian, you know, the Jew that really isn't, you know, so you know, Jonah and just it's the ending where, you know, just reminds me of God's heart. I just need to remember the end of Jonah and God's heart. You know, what about all these people? And in this idea of the whale, and we find ourselves inside the whale, and God sends a whale sometimes that feels like it just swallows us up whole. That really is a transformative event. And so I love the book of Jonah and read it, you know, every year as a part of my journey. And for the same reason, my favorite New Testament book is the book of Mark. There's another book that I can just kind of go back over and over because again, it's just it's so sparse that every detail counts. And so I love to kind of go through and say, why is this here? And what is this point? And I find actually both of them to be very helpful for our understanding the broader narrative of the scripture, of God with us and living this through, which is very different than perhaps some of the background I grew up in, which was much more of a individual discipleship. This is kind of the rules you're supposed to follow kind of approach. And really have moved in recent years towards a lot of what N.T. Wright is talking about in terms of, or Skye Jethani, I've been reading some of his lately about, God with us and this whole narrative, one narrative about God with us and living with God. And so both of those help me kind of complete this, you have all these images of the Old Testament, but God really has a heart of compassion for all people. And it's right there in the middle of the Old Testament. So.
Yeah, Jonah is one of my favorite Old Testament books as well, just because of the inclusion.
Yeah.
Just the simple fact that Jonah is called to minister to the people group that brought them into exile. I mean, that's the
right
mind blower for me. It's just.
Can I relate to the really God? You really want to do what? Come on, I'm not going to do it, and so it's such a rich story.
And I like Mark's resurrection.
Yeah.
I mean, I like all the resurrection stories, but I like it. Yeah, being open ended.
They told nobody. Oh, I thought you liked the snake part where they're handling the snakes. That's what I like. Drinking poison.
Yeah, there you go. That's the part I like. I like the open-endedness. I like not having it be a conclusion, but that you're
it's
left.
Real. It's more authentic, right?
Yeah,
it's real.
I think that's what happened, actually.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's brilliantly written. Brilliantly written. I mean, it's just brilliant. So you could study it for years and still just tap the surface.
The next two questions you could really combine to one, but it's a question around hope. And we find ourselves in this time of radical transition and stress and a season.
Oh, is it stressful right now?
Yeah, it's a season that we weren't expecting. I mean, I shared with my church at Cornerstone last Sunday that how many of you thought this time last year that the whole world would be shut down?
Right.
You just don't know. These things happen without. And so I wanted to ask you, how do you define hope? And you could kind of feed off of that maybe and head towards what is your hope for the church?
Yeah, I guess they're tied together. I mean, hope is, as I think about hope, I think about God with us, that clearly hope comes from the presence of God. And this last Sunday I preached on, flying by the instruments and not by sight of the plane. The plane's in the storm, you got to have the instruments. And some of those are, of course, our spiritual roots in the collective witness of people that have sought God in crisis and have found God. And then I think about my own times of crisis, whether it's through a serious surgery or it's a loss of a parent or different things where I can point and say, God was there. I mean, God was in that person that came alongside of me, or God was in that doctor that healed. And I know from my own experience and from the collective witness, God is with us in the midst of crisis. And I can't always see it. I don't always feel like it, but there are instruments on the plane to tell us. And that gives me hope that it's not just me. And I think tied to that is this idea that God is going somewhere, that God is, as the scripture says, this long narrative, God is started in the garden with us and came and then was with us with Christ and is going to be with us again in the book of Revelations, this constant theme of God with us. And so I have the hope, which Steve pointed out, some trust and faith that God is going to bring to completion this vision and this dream. And so knowing that God is with me, even when I can't see it, relying on those instruments to know the scriptures of the collective witness, to know that he's here, God is here, and then knowing that God is continuing to work towards this wonderful vision gives me hope in the midst of that. And I think that's part of what I would say for the church. I really am kind of really sick over the polarization in the church. It's really It's in my context, that's a very real thing, and we're more divided and polarized than ever before, in my experience. And I feel like this is the time we need to start from our common ground and our common need. You know, all religions, all faiths start from this idea that we have anxiety and a need to control. And so we kind of work into this way of approaching God because we're anxious and we're afraid and we want to control things, be less afraid. And we don't start there. We start with our differences rather than we all have this common anxiety that's going on. And so my hope for the church is that we can kind of get past some of that and get into being other focused rather than individualistic. And then in that, being open to God's new dream, because clearly what was is not going to be. And so how do we quickly adapt to what God is calling us to, even when we don't quite see it? We're flying the plane while it's being built. And so, you know, how do we do that? So that's kind of my thoughts are around that area.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to kind of get our heads around this idea that it's always changing, right? I mean, you're never ever going to arrive. You know, with every ending is a new beginning, every ending is a new beginning, it's just this continual cycle. And then we find ourselves within those patterns. And some of us are, you know, called in certain moments to rise to the occasion of the day, so to speak. I mean, Martin Luther King used to say he got caught up in the spirit of the time. He didn't ask for this, you know. And so I'm thinking about that relationship that we have with the church and how, you know, when you talk about being in a structured environment when you were growing up where there were certain rules and parameters that you had to live by. And now we're in a society where there really are not a lot of rules or parameters. As a matter of fact, there's more questions than there are rules and parameters.
Right.
How do you do ministry in that, you know?
Well, I think it's hard, but I think part of it is, you know, clinging to the rules and clinging to the differences only make us less relevant to people in society right now. There's just, you know, in a context where all those rules are off limits in some sense, clinging to them has actually made us seem like we're even more irrelevant. And so, you know, I think you got to get back to the common ground, and it's got to be other than ourselves. And that's really scary, who we've invested so much. I mean, even as a preacher, it's really scary because we invest so much of our energy and time, and now all of my life in the structures, in the facilities, in the preaching that we have, and all that is in question. And so that's hard, of course, you know, and we don't mind change if we like it, but if we're afraid of it or it's unknown, then we don't like it. And it's, you know, it's a good change. You know, then I'm all for it. I think the other part that really scares me a little bit, or I don't know, scares it, concerns me is in the season of virtual, it really is really highlighting and valuing affinity as instead of proximity. And so, you know, I get to go to church with people that I want to go to church with, that are like me, that, you know, I agree with, and I don't have to live in a relationship with anybody that is different or doesn't agree with me. And I think that's a real loss. And I'm not sure how we get back from that.
Yeah, you're preaching it now, because to me, that is one of the biggest issues. I always share with the community. I'm a part of it. Well, in the United Methodist Church, even the reason I go to church is because there are people there I don't like.
Yeah. You
know, it forces me to confront my own prejudices, my own self-interest. It forces me to be in a relationship with people. I tend to be more of an extrovert, so I don't mind being around. I know you're more of an introvert, so that forces you to be around more extrovert people. I mean, that community calls us into that relationship where I do think you're right. You can pick and choose online what you want to watch and listen to.
Yeah. So and you know, so how do we come back from that? Because there's not a lot of places where we have to do that. I mean, I live in my cocoon in my house with my family, you know, and venture out once a week or something, you know, to get groceries and go to church or something because I don't have to be there. But I don't have to be around people that I don't disagree with at all, and even less. And so that's a challenge. And then I think it's really challenging as a preacher, our fundamental idea that church has been about so much content. And you know, whatever, now you can get content is free wherever. So what is that? What does church look like beyond that? And how do you drive back? And one of the things that I've always found and appreciate about you is you're very sacramental. And so how do we get back to Sacramento when we're not in proximity? And what does that look like? And so there's some real big questions that are fundamental changes. And so do I remain afraid of them, or do I pick that hope up that God is indeed going to work through that to the ultimate end of being with us? And where do I focus in the meantime? So that's the stuff that I wrestle with.
Yeah. And wrestling is a part of hoping too. I mean, because your desire is the best for the church, the community that brings this really, really good news of Jesus to the world. And yeah, that's what I find. I actually find comfort and joy and hope in the fact that we're willing to throw these questions out, like really take them seriously, because we're an incarnational body. That's at the core of our theological identity, is being present. I mean, your whole beginning of your message of hope is because God is present,
Yeah.
So, and the younger folks would argue digitally, we're present with each other right now, but we're really not. I mean, I can't give you a hug. I can't, let you drool on my shoulder.
Well, if you want, I can work something out. Kind of like baptism of water from the Jordan River. I can send a little vial.
You can send me a vial. It was in Detroit just a few weeks earlier.
People were healed. Yeah, I've actually been really proud of the church. I mean, from the inside, I've really been, there's parts that I get frustrated with, but I've been really proud about the way some of our churches have really tried to respond to that and try to be creative with that and live in that and live in community in spite of it. And so, good for them and good for us that, God's Spirit continues.
Yeah, amen to that. Hey, Dave, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you
for taking the time to share a little bit. And we're thrilled with the work you're doing at First United Methodist Church in Winter Park. They're lucky to have you.
Yeah, I think so sometimes.
All you got to do is tell them Roy might be appointed here someday.
There you go. Run. No. They'll never release you down there. Not going to happen. I appreciate you, Roy. Love you, brother.
Love you, brother. And tell your family I said hey, and thanks again.
All right, man. We'll talk.
All right, bye-bye.